At the end of last week, Danny Manning became the second assistant coach to be named to Kenny Payne's staff at Louisville. We'll talk about that hire and more on this episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On the Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to take this time, as always, to personally thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. For those who are not aware of who I am, I serve as a credentialed media member for Cardinals Sports Zone. I also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. Today's episode will be basketball-centered. We will begin talking about Danny Manning getting introduced as the second assistant coach on Kenny Payne's staff at Louisville and talk about why that was a huge hire for the first-time head coach. We will then transition into Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, the Tennessee transfer, cut his list recently, and Louisville made the cut. We will discuss what he could bring to the Cardinals front court. And then to wrap the show up, we will talk about the women's basketball team adding a big-time transfer in Florida State's Morgan Jones and what she brings to the program. We'll start out talking about Danny Manning. And if you've been following along on social media, I think that everyone kind of knew that there was some type of coaching news coming at the end of last week. All throughout last week, the talk was, okay, Nolan Smith was one of those hires that a lot of people saw coming. It seemed like it had been predicted for, quite some time, right when Kenny Payne got announced. Even before Kenny Payne was announced, Nolan Smith was rumored to be on that staff. So when he was hired as the first assistant onto Kenny Payne's staff, well, there wasn't really much surprise. Now, that's where I guess you could say the predictability went out the window because, it's been rumored that Kenny Payne works in silence. A lot of the stuff that he does isn't really put out there for the media to pass along. I guess you could say, if that makes sense. Basically saying that recruiting wise and staff hires and stuff like that, you're not going to hear a lot about it from the media because there are not a lot of leaks in the program and stuff like that. So it seemed like the general consensus was that many Louisville fans thought it was going to be Milt Wagner that got the second assistant spot, and the third assistant spot was an unknown. However, Friday morning, that still was the case. It seemed like Milt Wagner was going to be that second assistant, announced at noon on Friday afternoon. About 30 minutes before the press conference or so, maybe an hour, Danny Manning's name started to float around through media circles. And very quickly, the news came out before the press conference that Danny Manning, the longtime Kansas assistant and former head coach of Wake Forest, was joining Kenny Payne's staff as the second assistant. And I have to say, this is a huge hire for Kenny Payne in his first year as a head coach for a couple reasons. Number one, and I think that you kind of go back to the press conference between the press conference of Kenny Payne's introductory press conference, Nolan Smith's press conference, and now Danny Manning's press conference. Kenny Payne has really held true to his criteria and what his priorities are when he's looking for an assistant coach. He's looking for a coach that has a passion in helping student athletes reach their goals, helping them to become not only better players but better people as well, and just have a passion for just overall helping student athletes grow their respective games. So it was obvious with the way that Kenny Payne was discussing Danny Manning was that he views him in the same light that he does Nolan Smith, and that is a terrific ambassador or a potential terrific ambassador for this program and a person that really has his priorities straight when it comes to being a coach and teaching young men and stuff like that. So ultimately, There was some concern, I guess you could say, a little bit of like, what? Why? And I think that that really stemmed from the fact that Danny Manning didn't necessarily have a great tenure at Wake Forest. Spent, what, 7 seasons from 2014 to 2020 in Winston-Salem. Didn't necessarily work out. Spent the previous 2 seasons at Tulsa. But before that, from 2003 to 2012, he was an assistant at Kansas. And he joins both Kenny Payne and Nolan Smith as a coach that has won a national championship as a player, a national championship as a coach, and drafted in the first round of the NBA draft. So when you're trying to sell the dream of, hey, I can get you from, being a collegiate athlete and help you to achieve your goals of going to the NBA. I feel like it would be a lot easier to do that, or maybe, young student athletes have the um, less concerns when it comes to trusting you because, you've been there. You were a student athlete, you've been in their shoes, you've won a national title as a player, all three of you have. You've won a national title as a coach, and you've made it to the National Basketball Association. I'm not saying that other coaches can't be trustworthy, but I'm saying, and I feel like it would be a little easier to trust a guy that has been there, that's been like, hey, I've done that. I've, won a national title, both as a player and a coach. I've been to the NBA. I've gotten there. I know what it takes to get there. So, Kenny Payne being a player developer of big men, to now add Danny Manning onto the coaching staff, that's huge to have as an All-American, one of the best players to play at Kansas, which is one of the blue bloods of college basketball. It's hard to look past what Danny Manning has done in his career, both as a player and as a coach. He's won a national title under Bill Self, learned under one of the best coaches to ever coach the game of basketball. So ultimately, I think the fact that Danny didn't necessarily have the greatest, levels of success at Wake Forest, I think that's getting a little bit overblown. Look, I get it. It's not necessarily ideal when you look at things, calling a spade and saying, look, he just didn't necessarily work out at Wake Forest. And I think that that's the point that I'm trying to get across, is sometimes, there's a lot of factors that go into, being a head coach and certain situations. And I'm not saying that Danny Manning could not make a good head coach at a different stop. Sometimes guys are not necessarily meant to be head coaches. Like I said, not saying he's not meant to be a head coach. It just didn't work out. And, he's a great recruiter, helped a handful of big men at Kansas, from Sasha Khan and Cole Aldrich to Darnell Jackson, the Morris twins, and Jeff Withey. So, the body of work is there with the way that he's helped various big men at Kansas be able to make the NBA. You talk about Olivier Sarr at Wake Forest, John Collins at Wake Forest as well. Guys that, have seen a ton of development in their respective games over their time in college. So I think that this is a great hire for a handful of reasons. Number one, you have a guy that's won on every level. He's won as a coach, he's won as a player, won national titles as both. He's gotten drafted into the NBA. He was very successful as a player. You get that expertise in terms of instruction. You have Kenny Payne, who's been revered as a great big man developer. Now you add Danny Manning to the mix, and that itself is, a heck of a sales pitch in recruiting. Is, hey, if you're a big guy, why not come to Louisville, where you can learn from some of the best? The recruiting aspect of it, he's helped Kansas in the past when he was on the Jayhawks coaching staff, a very solid recruiter. And not to mention having a coach with head coaching experience on a staff for a coach that has not yet been a head coach yet. I know that was a little bit that was a good amount of stuff to unpack in the way that I worded that. But for a first-year head coach that, hasn't been a head coach before, adding a guy that maybe not necessarily had a ton of success, but he has been a head coach, and let alone been a head coach at the Power 5 level in the conference that you're going to be playing. So, being able to have that leadership and that, mentorship for Kenny Payne on this journey is huge. But I love this hire for a handful of reasons. Kenny Payne, this one was out of left field. He pulled a rabbit out of a hat, which a lot of people rumored that Kenny Payne would operate in that fashion of, you don't necessarily hear about stuff. There are no leaks until it's, ready to be announced. So great hire. Nolan Smith was an A+. I think Danny Manning was an A+. I'm very interested to see who the third member of the coaching staff is going to be. So we will discuss that when the time comes. But for now, we'll transition into another transfer that has included Louisville in his list cut. Tennessee big man Brandon Huntley-Hatfield entered the portal and has now trimmed his list down to 5. The Cardinals have made that list. The question now is, how big or how solid of a chance do the Cardinals have? And if he were to come to Louisville, well, what does he bring to the Cardinals front court? We will answer both of those questions here in a second after we talk about our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of the betting stats and sports info. Find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline is where the game starts. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen every day. Made the announcement a couple times last week. Starting Thursday, April 28th, tune in to Locked On NFL Draft's live coverage of the 2022 NFL Draft, with all 3 days of real-time analysis from our extensive lineup of experts and insiders. And for those of you dying to know who your team will take, catch Odyssey and Locked On's NFL Mock Draft special hosted by Brian Peacock and former scout Matt Williamson of the Peacock and Williamson NFL show all week leading up to the first pick. Transitioning, staying in men's basketball, but transitioning over into the transfer portal. We talked last week about Broome and McNeil from Morehead State and West Virginia cutting their lists respectively, but both including Louisville in those list cuts. Another transfer that has been talked about a good amount over the weekend and into the beginning of this week is Tennessee big man Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, who recently cut his list of 5. The Cardinals making that list. All 5 schools will get a visit from the Tennessee freshman. SMU gets the first visit, actually going on right now. Auburn will have the 21st through the 22nd. Then Huntley-Hatfield will be in town for Thunder over Louisville from April 23rd to 24th. He will then go to Arizona State and wrap up his visits with Wake Forest from April 25th to April 27th. Now, discussing how solid of a chance the Cardinals have here, it seems like Auburn is in the lead at the moment. Obviously, having lists or having visits planned and actually taking those visits are two totally different sides of the spectrum. So if Huntley-Hatfield takes his visit down to Auburn and he leaves, he leaves Alabama without committing to Bruce Pearl's program, I think that Louisville has a very solid chance. We talked about, having Kenny Payne, having Danny Manning on the coaching staff and trying to sell, have the sales pitch of, look, we can get you to the league. We can help you achieve your goals. We can help you develop your big man skills, your post offense, your post defense, stuff like that. So I think that if I would have to put a probability on it at this point, I'm kind of in like the 30% range, just because I don't necessarily have any type of inside information. I think that Auburn is the clear-cut leader at the moment, but all it takes is for one solid visit to go down, and player ends up committing to that school. So you have to not only hope that he doesn't commit right away when he visits Auburn, but number two, you have to knock the visit out of the park when he does come to Louisville for Thunder over Louisville. But it looks like he's probably going to make all of his visits, considering that there really is no time in between. It's visit after visit after visit after visit after visit. And I think that he actually probably wraps up all 5 visits, in a little over a week. So it seems like he's trying to make sure that this process is thorough, but also goes pretty smoothly and quickly, so he can make a decision. So I would assume that he would indeed, visit Louisville. So at the end of the day, it really would just depend. Don't really have any type of insider information here. I know that Marcus Maven of 93.9 The Ville, former Louisville great Marcus Maven, he has a connection to, I believe it's a family member of Brandon Huntley-Hatfield's. And it seemed like the Cardinals were very involved before he reclassified and committed to Tennessee last summer. So you would think that that would have to bode well for the Cardinals' chances here. Sidney Curry has gone on social media, basically, saying, or I think probably like supporting Huntley-Hatfield and trying to get him to come here. But in terms of what he would bring to this program and to this front court more specifically, after watching some of the highlight clips and going back and watching some of the postseason games for Tennessee, I think that the stat sheet or I guess the season statistical averages don't necessarily tell the full story of the impact that Huntley-Hatfield had for the Volunteers and Rick Barnes' squad. Just a refresher, this season he appeared in 35 games, averaging 12.5 minutes per contest, 3.9 points per game, shooting the ball 45% from the field, 15% from three, 59% from the free throw line, averaging 3 rebounds per contest, 3 blocks per contest. So statistically speaking, not necessarily a ton that, jumps off the page. He did start the last 13 games for the Volunteers after, Tennessee had some injuries in the front court to their starting big man. But when I watched some season highlights from the beginning of the season and from where he was at the end of the season, it was evident that he got more comfortable as the year went along. I think that Huntley-Hatfield has a ton of potential on both ends of the court. 6'10", 200 and in the 245 range. I think that the frame is there. There doesn't need to be a lot of work to try to add muscle there, considering that the frame is really already NBA ready. But the skill set just needs some refining, needs some polishing, because you can tell that the foundation is there. When he gets the ball in the paint, I really do like his ability to find the opposing, or not the opposing, but usually it seems like with Tennessee, he was playing with 2 big men, or, himself and another big man. So his ability to be able to pass from big to big, high-low action, and be able to catch the ball around the free throw line and dump it down into the paint, or even kick it out to the corner. He shows the willingness to pass the basketball when he does get his back to the basket, which you're thinking, okay, well, he passes the ball out of the paint. What's the big deal about that? Well, sometimes with collegiate bigs, there's the issue of when they get the ball in the paint, it kind of serves as a stopgap for the offense. You lose a lot of the cohesive flow, and it's a lot of individual one-on-one isolation, trying to either out-strengthen or get a little crafty and get to the basket. But I think that Huntley-Hatfield, when he realizes that maybe the shot that he's looking for is not there, he has no hesitancy to kick the ball out to an open shooter, or even if he's at the free throw line, to be able to dump it down low. The most encouraging thing about his offensive skill set is he shows the potential that he can hit that the 18, 20-foot jumper. I'm not saying that next year with an off season of getting developed by Kenny Payne and Danny Manning would have a Gorgie Zhang type impact, to where his go-to move in the half court is that sweet spot jumper at the elbow. I'm not saying that he will have that level of success, but I do think that he has the potential, and he's shown that he can shoot that shot. And not only that, but he can work himself into that shot. So what I mean by that is he can, pull up off the dribble. He can, serve in catch and shoot situations. So I think that the offensive potential is there. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily match the production at this point, but at this stage for the Louisville roster, it seems like you have your starting big men. Sidney Curry is there, so you're looking for guys to fill out the rotation. Right now it's about finding a backup five. I know you have JJ Traynor, you have Jalen Withers, but neither of those guys, in my opinion, are true centers, so to speak. I know it's positionless basketball, but I look as JJ Traynor is more of a four. Jalen Withers is a little bit of a hybrid, but with his skill set, maybe a little bit more of a stretch big rather than a traditional back to the basket, down in the paint type big like Brandon Huntley-Hatfield projects to be. I think with his strength, with his ability to stretch the floor, and his willingness to pass the basketball, I think the sky is the limit for him on the offensive side of the court. Defensively, it's just a matter of basically allowing the speed to slow down just a little bit more. It seems like defensively he has good footwork when it comes to defending the post. I like his ability to get out and run in transition, and with his size, his 6'10" frame, it's not likely that he's going to be a guy that gets bullied down low, and could project to be an above average shot blocker in the ACC. So next season, you would probably expect Brandon Huntley-Hatfield to fit into a rotational role, which I don't want that to sound like he's going to be playing minimal minutes. I do think that he would play a very solid role. But ultimately, it's going to come down to where he decides to go. And also Roosevelt Wheeler, we talked about there really only being one decision left to be made for the Cardinals. And, Roosevelt Wheeler, it seems like the consensus right now is that he's likely to come back. I know that multiple media members have reported that. Jeff Greer, my apologies, Jeff. He was the first to report that. It makes you wonder, is he kind of waiting to see what some other guys in the transfer portal are going to decide before making his decision whether to come back or not? I'm not saying he is, just kind of thinking out loud here and speaking my mind. But it would be interesting if the Cardinals had both Roosevelt Wheeler and Brandon Huntley-Hatfield. So it'll be interesting to see how these next couple of weeks play out. But nonetheless, Huntley-Hatfield would be playing a very solid role here. I love his offensive potential. I think that he is just scratching the surface of the player that he could be on both ends of the court. So it would be a very solid get for the Cardinals, despite what you see from the box score. So we will talk about more transfer news when we get more transfer news. But for the conclusion of the show, I want to switch over to women's basketball, where Jeff Walls' program added a huge transfer in Florida State's Morgan Jones. Now, if you are listening to this audibly, you will hear a couple of automated ad reads. If you're watching this on YouTube, obviously you will not hear those. So we will jump right on in to the final segment of the show. And that really is, one of the transfers, or the caliber of transfers, that could be the difference from, a Sweet 16 or Elite 8 to a possible Final Four or winning a national title. Florida State's Morgan Jones, to basically call a spade, has been a thorn in the Louisville side for the past couple of seasons. In 2021, the Seminoles, led by Jones, defeated the third-ranked Cardinals in an upset victory for the Seminoles. This past year, Florida State traveled to the Yum Center back in late January. They lost by 13. However, Jones scored 28 points while grabbing 6 rebounds to go along with that. She shot 11 for 18 from the field. And simply put, the Cardinals did not necessarily have an answer for her. Overall for the season this year, averaged 13.8 points per game, 5.7 rebounds per contest, 1.6 assists, 1 steal, 1 block, 46% from the field, 77% from the free throw line, but shot 0% from behind the arc. Morgan Jones, 6'2" senior guard from Jonesboro, Georgia, back-to-back All-ACC First-Team selection, was also named to the All-ACC defensive team for this past season. I think that for Jeff Walz for this upcoming season, it's basically about adding as much talent as you can with the spots that you have open. Morgan Jones essentially filled the roster spot that Romani Parker left when she entered the transfer portal and ultimately ended up at Mississippi State. So, simply put, the Cardinals are having to replace a good amount of production. You lose Kiana Smith, an 1,000-point scorer. You lose Emily Ingsler, which is one of the heart and souls of the team, a do-it-all Swiss Army knife type of player. You lose a veteran point guard in Chelsea Hall. So you replace a good amount. Haley Van Lith is a star in the making. You have Olivia Cochran and Liz Dixon that provide some very solid post minutes down low. And multiple other players in a very solid recruiting class. But Morgan Jones, now you have a backcourt running mate that will be slotted into the starting lineup. And what better way to, add to the starting lineup than literally going out and getting one of the best players in the ACC over the past couple seasons. She's going to be a player that utilizes the mid-range a lot. One of the weaknesses over the past couple seasons before the team got Emily Ingsler was, wing athleticism. Morgan Jones, fits what the Cardinals are looking for in that realm. A very, very solid defender, a long defender at 6'2", has a good amount of size, very aggressive around the rim. And not only that, but very, very crafty in the mid-range, hits some very tough shots. So, I think that when you look at the fit with Haley Van Lith and her ability to space the court, handle the basketball, I think that you're looking at Haley as probably the number one lead guard on the team next year, with Morgan Jones kind of being a secondary ball handler, and like a 1A, 1B in terms of, offensive creation. But her ability to create her own shot in the mid-range, off balance, get to the rim, utilize her size to, exploit mismatches and stuff like that. This is a huge addition for Jeff Walz. This has the potential, and this is no disrespect to Emily, because Emily had a huge impact on this team. This is a Emily Ingsler type of impact for the Cardinals in a different way. I think that this team needed some toughness last season. They needed some post defense down low. They needed some wing athleticism, a player that was very solid on the defensive end. Emily Ingsler fit that. This upcoming year, however, it's like you're needing a little bit more of an offensive, scoring. When it comes to assistance, I think that Morgan Jones fits what you need this year, and the impact could be very similar to that of Emily Ingsler's. And what I mean by that is just being exactly what the doctor ordered for the Cardinals. Now, there have been talks about more transfers in the works. If my memory serves me right, Louisville has all 15 scholarships full. Now, there has been talk about a player or a couple players entering the transfer portal that are on the team right now. Obviously, we'll probably hear about that news before we hear about any more additions. So it seems like Jeff Walz is not done, however. It seems like fans are, requesting a true point guard or a post presence. I think I'm in the boat of, look, let's add as much talent as humanly possible, and let's make the fit work afterwards, because we're trying to get over the hump and win a national title, which Jeff Walz will do at some point in his career at Louisville. But, hey, thanks again for making Locked on Louisville your first listen every day. Tomorrow's episode, we will talk about a possible commitment that is on the horizon for the men's basketball team. We will do probably a mailbag segment, and we might have a special guest on the show. But before we get out of here, do yourself a favor. Make your second listen Locked on NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So that's going to wrap up this Tuesday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day, and we will see you right back here